For the folks who don't know you, how about you give a quick introduction about Betterview and, let's start with Betterview.
Sure.
Then we'll talk about you.
Yeah, so Betterview is a property intelligence platform. So we use aerial imagery to process buildings and properties for insurance carriers. So our go-to-market is the insurance industry. We have a platform that derives data points off of the imagery and also turns it into actionable insight. So, a lot of people focus on data. We think we need to create the data, but also give a platform that helps you do something with that data, right? Actually mitigate risk. And so, we kind of serve that full life cycle from quoting all the way through to claims and reinsurance, right? Our products fit into those for different companies.
So how are you different from the other geospatial providers?
Yeah, I think.
Because we've seen many of them popping up, I would say like 3 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think part of it goes to our background, right? So I grew up in the insurance industry of all places. My father started an insurance inspection company over 50 years ago. So doing property inspections for insurance companies all across the country, and I ultimately took over that business and then ended up selling it. But in that business, I lived the pain of trying to get better property data and get it at scale, because that's what we were doing. We were
Mm-hmm.
sending, boots on the ground inspectors uh, to all these places across the country. And, there was a lot of challenges with that, getting consistent, cost effective, and fast data around property. But roof especially was this big pain point for every insurance company. A little under 40% of all property claims dollars paid out in the US go to pay roof related claims. So it's this huge, bucket of claims activity for every property insurer, really. And so we really struggled at the inspection company to get good roof data for the insurance carriers. So I ultimately, set out to try to help solve that problem, and that's when I synced up with my co-founder David Lyman. We're both named David, and our wives are both named Catherine. A little known fact. But we originally started with the idea we'd use drones to capture this imagery. We'd use drones to capture the
Mm-hmm.
roof information. And if you remember that, this was about 6.5, 7 years ago. Drones were really kind of starting to take
Yep.
flight. No pun intended. And drones.
Hey, it's a funny pun.
Drones were great, right? Like they could get very high resolution imagery, get very close to the buildings. The challenge was really scaling that, right? It was just too expensive and slow to send, because you had to send a person out with the drone, right, to go capture it. So um, our customers, and we did tens of thousands of flights for insurance companies, right, came to us and said, look, we love what you guys are doing, but how do we do it faster, cheaper, quite frankly, like do it at scale? And that's when we said, well, what are the other imagery sources we can use, and use the same computer vision that we had used on the drone imagery to extract data from aerial imagery. And so we've really lived this problem quite literally, right? Since I was a little boy, I have lived and breathed some of these challenges around getting high quality data to insurance companies. We've lived it. And ultimately, I feel like, really living and breathing the problem helps you find a solution for that problem. So we can really speak our customers' language. I think the other big thing is we don't think it's just about the data. It's about the data plus the actionability of that data. So, how do you really get to predict and prevent versus just repair and replace? So the current model is repair and replace. You have a loss, we pay it as an insurer, everybody moves on, right? We think that's great and that's fundamental to insurance, but isn't a better scenario one in which you can predict that something may happen and prevent it from ever happening in the future? Think about wildfire. If Betterview can detect that there's vegetation in the area, we can work with the insurance carrier to tell the insured, hey, cut back some of this vegetation. We've mitigated some of the risk. and hopefully prevented a loss, right? That is the future that we see coming, really making the insureds partners in risk management. And we think Betterview's platform can be a key to that. We think that's a different tactic rather than just, hey, Betterview's got great data. That's fine and fundamental, but you have to go beyond that.
No, I love that you coined it as mitigation, because one of the things that we keep talking about, be proactive, can insurer be, lean into maintenance, but risk mitigation is much smarter to coin it in a way that most of the carriers will understand and absorb it into the system. Because and I would love to know who you're working with that has that mindset, because we know Hippo, Asaf One, they are completely into just tell us what we want to build your 1-800 phone number for everything that you need around the house. But we are an MGA, right? But they will help you to pack any, leak detectors, roof checks, whatever that may be. And that's an amazing approach that they basically did all in on maintenance and being proactive. How are other insurance companies deal with that? Let's call it, what's their attitude towards risk mitigation and understanding that, okay, that house can be in a risk, especially here in California, right?
Sure.
From a wildfire, or that's an old roof. So most likely the next tropical storm, we will need to replace that roof. Here are a list of things that you should do to reduce the risk.
Well, I think that mitigation piece, I think to step back for a second, most people don't want to have a loss. They don't want to have a claim. Most insureds, right? Yes, there's people out there that are just trying to get a free new roof from their insurance company, but the majority of people, it's a very disruptive, whether you be a business or you're a homeowner, right? It's very disruptive to have a loss, right? Let's say I have a roof loss, my roof leaks, everything gets ruined inside. It's this very disruptive thing. And I think that gets forgotten sometimes, that, insureds don't want to have claims. They don't want to have losses. And the insurance company obviously doesn't either, because it's, impactful to their bottom line. So like insureds are aligned in that. And I don't think that really gets discussed very often. So the other thing I'll just mention is people expect more of their brands these days. So they're used to this Amazon experience, this Uber, this DoorDash, right, where you kind of have more of a relationship with your brand. And I don't think insurance has caught up to that just yet. No, and you see some new folks really trying to do that, like Hippo is a good example. This opportunity, the data I'm talking about, like the vegetation or the condition of your roof. I mean, this exists today. I can tell you because we create it, right? So my insurer happens to be one of those kind of newer age insurers, right? And they use some of this data during quoting to determine, like, do they want to quote it or not. But they never reach out to me and say, hey, Dave, we know the condition of your roof. It looks like in the next 4 or 5 years, you've really got to replace it, or you've got to do this, or you got to do that. Wouldn't that be a better experience for me as a homeowner, right? To have this proactive partner, giving me this data that they actually already have. Like, they're sitting on this data, I can tell you beyond, a shadow of a doubt, because I know, right? So like a lot of the carriers have some of these things from people like Betterview, and it's a lost opportunity. So I just think there's a ton of that risk mitigation that can happen. And we do see it with customers of ours, but people are still dipping their toe in, right? We see it even with people that have very in-depth agent networks. If they're going to cancel or non-renew a policy because of the roof, just for example, they're showing the Betterview report to that agent and saying, look, here's the hole in the roof, like, this is why. And it's making and there's some case studies even on our website. It's making those conversations a lot more interactive and a lot easier for those customers, because the imagery is there, the data's there, right? It's a data driven discussion at that point versus no, my roof's great. It's like, well, no, here's the image and here's the data outcome of that.
Are you working with the insurance companies or with the agents? Or I assume that the insurance companies are the paying customers and maybe the agents are the final users?
It's the carriers mainly, right? Some of the of the carriers that we work with are giving the reports to the agents or using it to have those conversations. But it's always, in our case, it's always been driven by the carrier itself.
And is that so? Because in your will, you're touching almost all the parts, or let's call it touch points with the policyholder, underwriting, claims, maintenance, even the reinsurers, and the renewal of the policy. That usually means that you need to talk with completely different departments in the carrier. How does it work? Who's your champion there? Was that from the underwriting, or you started with the claims?
Usually with underwriting, yeah. So underwriting has been
Interesting. Wow.
our main kind of users to start with. As we see, a lot of times we start with underwriting, and then claims sees what kind of data is available to them, and then they want to participate. But as you noted, claims doesn't necessarily talk to underwriting, right? In some of these organizations, and we think that we can be a catalyst to have some of those conversations actually happen.
You met David, and you decided, it's a good time to start a startup. When did you guys establish Betterview?
So it was about 7 years ago now that we originally
7 years ago. Wow.
established it. And like I said, originally as kind of using drones to operate. And David had sold a previous business, a startup that he had started to a company called Constant Contact in the social media aggregation space. And he was looking for something else to do, and we were both kind of independently exploring drones at the time. And a mutual friend of ours kind of made the connection and said, "Oh, you guys should talk. You're both talking about drones and aerial imagery. You should meet." And that was kind of the connection. So I had come at it from the insurance side, the inspection side, and growing a fairly large family business into something. And he had done a venture backed business before, so it was kind of a good connection at the time.
And 7 years later, what's the size of the team?
So we're almost to 50 people now. So we've had a lot of growth. Actually, even within COVID and the last 12, 18 months, and continuing to grow. So split between San Francisco and San Diego. Engineering team and a lot of data science is in Carlsbad, down in San Diego, and then we have an office in San Francisco, and then people across the country now as well.
What do you feel were like, and I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm reading from a list. Sadly, I'm not, but it's always interesting to know what were the struggles, especially working within the insurance space. And luckily I wouldn't call it lucky, but I would say the advantage that you had is that you were coming from the insurance industry. Most of the founders that we have are coming from outside the insurance space and entering and trying to apply the same methodologies or technology that they knew outside, and then trying to sort of shove it into insurance. So what do you think were your advantages as an insurance person before starting a startup?
Yeah, I think that credibility and the pain that you feel from living through the problem yourself, right? And kind of struggling to solve it. I was trying to solve this problem around roof data and property data, consistent property data, long before Betterview, right? So I think that ability to kind of sit with the customer too and say, "Look, I felt your pain. I understand what you guys are trying to solve because I lived it." I think that's hard to replicate. Not to say that it can't. Like, obviously, people come from outside the industry all the time and disrupt industries, whether it be in insurance or otherwise. I think it's easier if you truly, deeply understand the problem. And I think that's why we were able to pivot, quite frankly, from the drone, to something more scalable, because we fell in love with the problem, not the solution, not the tools to the solution, right? Like falling in love with the problem and trying to solve the problem, not falling in love with the technology, because I see a lot of that, right? There's a lot of drone companies, for example, that are out of business right now, like Airware is a good example. They'd raised hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And they're gone, right? Because they fell in love with the technology, but not actually trying to solve any problems. And so founders that fall in love with the tools, right, the tech, versus really deeply understanding and internalizing the customer problem. I think that's hard. And I think since we had that background, and a lot of the people on our team, and some of them, right? They have deep insurance backgrounds, and I think that's been extremely helpful to us. I think the customer knows that we've lived their problem, and I think that matters.
Yeah, in our earlier chat, you mentioned Brian Anderson from Nationwide Ventures. Did you work with other strategic investors, or how did let's call it, the CVCs help you sort of to establish you have your credibility, but let's call it the institutional credibility to work with the other carriers and to get on board other investors?
Yeah, so we kind of have a mix of traditional, more traditional venture capital folks, Compound out of New York, and Manchester Story based in Des Moines, as well as a lot of CVCs, right? So EMC Insurance is an investor, Nationwide, as you mentioned, Guidewire, for on the core system side. So Guidewire is an investor, as well as Manufacturers Life. So, we've kind of got a good mix, right? And the strategic investors are helpful because they can give you insight that you might not otherwise get from like leadership of the insurance carriers, and roadmap, and what strategically some of these very large companies are thinking about, right? Not just today, but 5-10 years from now. And I think that's been extremely helpful. And I also think we've had really great and super supportive investors on the traditional venture capital side, right? So having that balance has been, very, very key, and it helps you get meetings with people that you'd like to get meetings with, and also these insights that you just might not get otherwise. So we've been extremely lucky to have a lot of these very supportive and knowledgeable folks, right? I consider it to be an honor to kind of work with some of them.
How much money did you raise?
Oh man, it's a good question. I think I want to say it's 15-16 million bucks, but every fundraise kind of goes together, at this point. But you're gonna make me pull up PitchBook just to remember my own funding numbers.
No, I'm sorry for that. I was about to ask about the ARR, but let's keep that a secret for now. Or any other traction that you want to talk. So, instead of ARR or, other financial traction, can you share with the audience a success story of how you work with one of your customers?
Yeah, there's a few, right? And again, these are public on the website. I think, EMC has seen a lot of success. Sinfin has seen a lot of success. Obviously, Nationwide. There's a great video on our website from a mutual company called Frederick Mutual that's seen a ton of success working with us. And then also, we have some of the newer players in the space, like Join, using our platform, and those were a lot of folks from Blackboard Insurance. That was a spin out of AIG. There's a lot of those success stories. I think we're still like everybody in this space, right? There's still just so much more to do, right? And we have a lot of companies, right, working with us today, but I think we're just scratching the surface, as we mentioned. Really trying to drive towards this, not just the data, but the ultimate end game. Like, what do you do with that data, right? And I think when we started, a lot of folks were still trying to decide, how do we use geospatial data? Do we use it? What does it all mean, right? That's not really the question anymore. Now it's, how do we scale this? How do we put it into, we've got a 5-year core system implementation going on. How do we put this in? And so we recently announced like a partnership with Socotra, for example. We want to be in the systems that people are already using to make their life easy. So it's like, Betterview is already here. We could just use you. We have a really great preset Guidewire accelerator integration, right? So people could use us within Guidewire very, very quickly. And we think these things are important. So, it's interesting to see how the industry's kind of changed in a relatively short amount of time.
Oh yeah, 7-8 years, we've seen a tremendous change, especially in the ecosystem. And as you mentioned, if you go on your website, we see all the different stickers from Accord to Guidewire and how you play as an integral part in the different flows that they have there. So are you exposing an API for those ecosystem players and core systems, or how do you integrate with them?
Yeah, on the core system side, we're doing integrations with basically everybody, right? So that a carrier who's using one of those
Mm-hmm.
core systems can fire up Betterview within that core system very, very quickly. But we also have a full API. So, our pre-processed data set, for example, turns around a data. So if you put in an address or a lat long, you get data in 459 milliseconds, right? So like if you're in a quoting an application on a website, for example, or you're using comparative raters, we can give data into that flow with relatively no lag time, right? And so there's a whole API behind all that, and also we have what I think is one of the best user interfaces in the market. So we're helping customers that want to visualize these things, because we at Betterview we really believe in transparency. So not only
Mm-hmm.
do we tell you like the score of the roof, but we'll show you what's wrong with it. We'll visualize that. But that's a very complicated user interface to create. So we've created all that, and we have one of the he was actually one of the first UI UX folks at Credit Karma, Mike Zimmer, who just does phenomenal design on our team. And we care deeply around like what's the user interface, how do you see this this information that's pretty complex information, but do it in a way that anybody can understand, right? So all the way from the core system integration, API to the user interface, and even batch upload and download. We provide all these different options. It just depends on the carrier, right, and where they are and what they want to do. Some only want the API, that's great. Some people want the full interface, that's great. Sometimes people want a combination of both. So it really just depends.
Yeah. The user experience is so important, especially when we are dealing with the carrier and asking ourselves who is going to use it at the end. As you mentioned, API to be part of the flow or the full blown UI. I think that another analogy we've seen also in cyber, because the data is so complex, and you think that, yeah, the agent, whoever is the underwriter, they don't really understand what cyber is, or cyber security, or cyber insurance. And there were, I think, Coveros and also Cyberite, and I'll throw in a couple of other examples that completely, I don't remember, that created this completely virtual, visual model to explain what's the risk and how to mitigate it. And from there, of course, the underwriting. Because we are dealing with data and understanding the data, and most important, taking action according to the data. How is your data works with other data providers? Because it's all about data, right? We are familiar with Carpi data, with Planck, and
Yeah.
the more incumbents, Verisk, etc., etc. How do you work together? Do you work together? And as an insurance company that has all this, a buffet of data, how do they know how to work with each one of you according to what they need?
Yeah, no, I think you hit something, and we don't profess to say that we're going to make all the data, right, that people need. So we've created our own partner ecosystem, and this will probably air afterwards, but we'll be launching this at ITC. We call it Partner Hub. And we'll be
Mm-hmm.
talking about a lot of our data partners, but it's people like Hazard Hub and other folks that you would know, right? Because what we found is our data, so the geospatial, so we know, the condition, we know these different things around the property from the imagery. Pair that with something like wildfire scores or other data points that these other third parties spend, all their time really focused on creating, right? I can name 5 companies that just focused on wildfire right now. Putting those things together and using our rules engine. So our software has a flag, a rules engine built into it. So for example, you could say if Betterview says it's in its high vegetation overhang and then it's in a wildfire zone based on Hazard Hub's wildfire score, or anybody's for that matter, automatically flag it so the underwriter can go look at it. And they could do that within our system or within Guidewire or wherever. But we have that whole rules engine built into our platform, and there's a whole partner ecosystem. And This will be shown at ITC, but you can go in there and say, I want to install this partner, this partner, this partner, and you can utilize that data out of the box, like today in our system. We think it's really important because there's not great geospatial UIs out there to bring these things together and then flag on it. And even if you don't want to use our UI, you can still pull in these data points and use our API to get hit with it and say, this rule was tripped. I want to know about it, right? So we think bringing these partners together in one place with the geospatial information is really, really powerful. And so much so we've invested quite a bit in creating this ecosystem.
First of all, I'm so happy that you brought up ITC. I'm looking forward to meet you and other David and a few of the folks that work with you. It's about time that we'll meet face to face. So that's great. You're bringing how many people? 16?
We're going to have about 16 people there. So hopefully other people will be there as well. We're looking forward to it.
Yeah, and at the same time, we're going to produce the first time Blueprint. So that's the Property and Real Estate Technology Conference. So that's going to be on the third level. ITC is second level in Mandalay Bay. That's going to be on the third floor. So that's going to be exciting, especially because you can be applicable also for property technology. So who are the people that you're looking to meet at ITC?
Yeah, I mean, obviously insurance carriers, right? We love to talk to anybody who writes property insurance or is involved with that is a potential, company we would love to talk to and learn what their problems are and see if we can't solve some of those for them or help them solve, be a piece of it. Additionally, we love talking to just great folks in the space, right? There's so many great friendships that you've made, I've made over the years in the insurtech world, and just some really great people. So it's looking forward to reconnecting with friends just in person, face to face, and seeing what else is out there. Right? It's cool to see what's happening in the cyber space, cyber insurance space, and all the technology around that right now, and obviously what's happening in property and more imagery, more data points in general, whether it be from IoT or otherwise, is good for Betterview, but good for the ecosystem. So, how can we put all this data to work, right? I think the first phase was like, let's create a bunch of data. This phase is like, in my mind, is how do we use all this data? How do we put it to work? And I think that's the most exciting part.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to touch? Different?
No, I think just this concept of mitigating risk and not just selecting better risk is a really important one, right? So much of the data has been used to let's select better risk, which is fundamental, right? We all want to select good risk, but how do we actually mitigate the risk and create a better experience for the consumer, right? For the insured in line with that. And I think there's just so much opportunity there, and it's really, really exciting. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see also how COVID maybe changed or didn't change some of the points of view from the carrier level, right? On what their strategic initiatives were, because I think that, that has changed. I know for us, right, they went from, we want to use geospatial data to supplement what we're doing with inspections to all of a sudden they couldn't send out inspectors. Nobody wanted an inspector at their house or their business with COVID, right? So, it changed very rapidly. The market changed in a way positive for companies like ours, but it changed very rapidly in a way that it was happening anyway, but this precipitated, this made it happen a little bit faster. And it's going to be interesting to see, what's next, right? Like what's the next thing and the next thing, and have any of those priorities, kind of changed. But like you said, I think a lot of it revolves around now. Some of these technologies, whether it be IoT or companies like Betterview, it's been around for long enough now. People have some data to see where it's worked, where it hasn't worked, and it's a maturing of that side of the industry a little bit, even though it's still relatively young. It's matured a bit, and I think it's interesting, right, to see how people really deploy these things now and really get to scale. A lot of what it's been has been in a smaller areas first. They might do it in a state, or they might try it in one area, right? And now things are starting to scale, and I think that's pretty exciting to see as well, because you don't really get to see the full advantage of some of these until you roll it out like across the whole country or half of the country, right? For some of these big carriers, you really need to roll it out at scale to see how it works. And I think that's exciting. It'll also be exciting to see, they're creating other data points on cyber, on other things. How do those interplay with property, right? Is there any? I think it's going to be really
Mhm.
interesting to see over the next couple of years. I think the on the property side specifically, the ability to answer questions at scale has gotten dramatically better, right? We have a database of every property in the United States sitting there with our own proprietary AI attributes on it, right? So like, you can throw a question at me, you say, I want to know all the homes with gabled roofs and asphalt shingle that's has a roof score below 50 that happens to have pools on it. And in seconds I could tell you where those are, right, and what they are, and I could tell you different things about that. I mean, these type of questions, even back in my inspection days, were not fathomable. You couldn't even think of how you'd be able to solve them, because it would have involved inspectors out in the field, and I mean, just problems that wouldn't be solved because they would have been too costly. And I think we're
Mhm.
just beginning to understand the impact. How can that impact segmentation? How can that impact pricing, catastrophe response, risk mitigation, as we were talking about earlier? I think it's just, you have to step back and understand, um, the questions that could be solved 10 years ago, you know, or could not be solved then, might be able to be solved now, and maybe more efficiently and faster. Maybe updated every day or every hour, right? Just the scope and scale has changed in a very dramatic way, and I think it takes some, um, stepping back and saying, I know we never thought we could answer that question, but now maybe we can, right? And that's exciting.
So let me ask you the question before the last question, because we are already at the 40-minute mark. So how you started with, and you talked about scale up, right? As every startup, it's all about scalability. This is like, that's the golden goose, or the golden something that we are all achieving towards. You started with a pilot. I assume you started with a pilot with a certain company.
Sure.
How did you scale up your operation?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of iteration, right? Starting with the pilot and listening to the customer, right? And trying to really deeply understand the problems that they were trying to solve. And you have to scale the technology, right? That's one aspect
Mhm.
of it. You have to scale, the infrastructure, meaning customer success, technical support, right? And as you go bigger and bigger with company, right? Like, from top 50 carriers to top 10 to top, you have to be able to support those different things. And also really figuring out what the value proposition is. When you talk about scale, and I was talking a little bit about like the maturity, has changed for the industry. As you get further along, the customers share with you, well, we used you for a year and these are the results we saw, right? And having those data points becomes really valuable, and also helps you decide where to invest, or where not to invest in the product, because you can start to see where the ROI really lies. And so, scaling is really multifaceted, from building the team, sales and support and so on and so on, to building, the product out to really meet the customer's needs, and then rapidly iterating, right? Like, we have a customer council with some of our really great customers on it. They tell us, right, hey, we want you to build more here or focus on this, and we listen, right? And we think it's really important. We're here to serve the customer. We're students of their problem, right? Versus
So
just,
basically, so if I'm sort of summarizing that, it was more a scalability of the use case, of the business case, rather than, oh, we threw, our API here and created, I don't know, a cloud there. But you recognize the ROI and you scaled on the value proposition to the insurance companies.
I think you have to, right? I think that for us that was really important, is like you said, is kind of consolidating around the use cases and saying, where can we really solve some problems for you, and then get deeper and deeper as we go, right? And it takes a while to do that, but I think otherwise you create technology and you hope people use it, and that's not a strategy I've ever
Mhm.
liked. It's like, let's create a bunch of cool tech and then people will just find a use case for it. I think we've always said, what are the problems that are out there, and new technologies could better solve them than the old way, right? And I think that's, back to your question, I think that's more scalable long term, and I think it's more defensible, quite frankly.
Yeah. So usually what we see is like, okay, a startup is working on some sort of pilot. It's limited to, I don't know, 1,000
Yeah.
agents or 100 agents in that pilot. And then or one state, and then they want to scale it up to 50 states or to all the, I don't know, 50,000 agents, opening it up to other carriers. And this is where usually there is that scalability question of how do you do that? And so you talk about, you need the right team, you need to have the right structure, you need to have that, let's call it customer advisory board, so they can point you in the right direction to understand your ROI, your operations capability. I love it. I'm just sort of summarizing it up for myself and maybe for the viewers. Cool. So let me ask you the last question that I'm asking everyone. Can you give us a recommendation of a book, a life hack, a habit, not Peloton, anything that you sort of learned in the past 18 months?
Oh man, that's a good one.
Including how to control 2 kids and a dog. That's
The
included.
dog is pretty easy, as you can see. He doesn't work very hard. But I'll give maybe a few here. I've really been liking, as we've been growing our sales team and organization, there's some great stuff out there by Jason Lemkin. SaaStr is the company, and I've been reading a lot of his things lately. Anything SaaS related, some great tidbits in there around growing and scaling the team. I think there's so many great resources online now, right? The problem is getting the stuff that's the right fit for where you are, and kind of learning from it. I think one of the I will butcher the quote, but one of the ones that I kind of live by is, and I'm going to butcher the quote, so forgive me, but have strong beliefs loosely held. And that's not so much a book or a recommendation, but it's kind of a rule that I find myself often living by, and hopefully it's helpful to some of the folks that are listening. I think this idea that you have strong beliefs on what the product should be, or the market, or whatever decision needs to be made, but you allow other people to tell their story, and sometimes persuade you otherwise. And I found that to just be a very helpful guiding principle that I think myself and David Lyman, my co-founder, really live by. And I think there's a lot to be said to that, and hopefully that's helpful to somebody. Maybe one person, maybe just David Lyman. Maybe him.
Fantastic. David, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Love what you're doing with the podcast, and appreciate you spending a couple minutes with me and hearing our story.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much.